Howdy. Well, in history, we look at a lot of big stuff. We look at presidents and wars, and later this week, we're going to take a look at the Gulf War and George Bush and all that. But we ought to look at culture too, because culture is what people experience in their day to day lives, the sounds that make them complete. As we've talked about before, music is one of those moments that encapsulates a time period. You hear a song, your mind goes back. So today we want to take a look at some of the music types and a couple artists just to show you what those types are about the late 70s, mostly 1980s. Okay, so we'll take a look at some of these. There will be some links on Classroom if you really want to see these groups and stuff like that, or hear some of them. So there'll be some links with it. But today, let's take a quick look at music. Now, tomorrow and Wednesday in class, we're going to look at our projects, and we'll take a look at television in the 1980s, movies of the 80s, sports of the 80s, fads and fashions. But today, let's do music. All right. During this era, I have to say probably the biggest type of music is disco. Disco is kind of like it's an experience that people wanted to dance. This is my era. I graduated from high school in 78, so I remember disco. I did not particularly like disco because there was nothing to it. It wasn't like the protest songs of the folk music of the 70s. I don't know that it had the smoothness of Motown or anything like that. This is going to be more dance music, glitz music. If you see the picture down below, you see the disco ball. It's about everybody being in a discotheque and wearing leisure suits and dancing, you know? It's got a 4/4 beat and it's real repetitive. It's easy to dance to because it just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. The lyrics aren't heavy, they don't mean anything. The music of the early 70s is music that means something, that's got a message. Disco, it's no message. It's just kind of the reaction. So, if you look at disco music, I mean, there's going to be movies. It's going to be like a huge phenomenon. But it really, I don't know, it'll last. It's more about an experience. I think America after the Vietnam War, America just wants to dance. They don't want to think about heavy stuff. And by the time the 70s have wound down and we're done with the war and Nixon's resigned with Watergate and everything like that, I think the country as a reaction goes to disco. Again, it's just mindless dancing. It's about being on the dance floor and that's what disco really was. Some of the biggest disco stars, if you look at over there on the right, you're going to see the Village People. YMCA, it's a classic. That's a disco thing. And if you look at their costumes, all over the top. Donna Summer was the disco queen. I mean, all of Donna Summer songs were big. People liked it. Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive. I Will Survive is kind of like the one song that, you know, girls would get out there on the dance floor and would just scream. It's kind of like it was one of those things. There were other disco people that I'm not going to go into, but you know what? Take a look. If you want to get on Facebook, on YouTube or whatever, if you find a group called Lips Inc., they've got a song called Funky Town. It's just like, that's weird music. Barry White has got a big soulful voice, and then ABBA, a group from Scandinavia that comes and dominates. Disco comes in, gets really big. There's going to be movies about disco, Saturday Night Fever and stuff like that, so it becomes really big. But it doesn't have staying power because, again, it's just about dancing and stuff. There's no message to the music. Okay. On Classroom, I think I've got a link to the BeeGees. The BeeGees, the Brothers Gibb, were really, really big and did a lot of the music to stuff like, you know, Saturday Night Fever, the movie, which I think we'll talk about tomorrow in class. But disco is a big, important thing. Now, rap. Rap really is an offshoot of disco. Rap, East Coast, and you have a DJ that'll be sampling. They'll have some music and then they'll back scratch on it. You're going to have chanted lyrics. This is not like anything we've had in music before. Now, the early music, the Sugar Hill Gang, and then Grandmaster Flash. On the Classroom, I've got a link to The Message. The 1982 song, The Message by Grandmaster Flash, is really one of the early rap hits. It is a rap song about living in the ghetto, living in time where times are bad, and trying to get people to understand that. Because TV doesn't want to show you anything like that. The movies didn't. But it was kind of trying to make a statement. Okay. It's the message. And he talks about the despair of living there, trying to keep your spirits up, trying to cope and trying to live. And that's really the start of rap. Now, Sugar Hill Gang comes along, Rapper's Delight. That is another early hit. Now, if you listen to Rapper's Delight, you're going to be able to catch the disco vibe. Same thing with the message. You'll also hear that disco vibe in it. Rap stays really on the East Coast. It's not mainstream. It's hard to find it on the radio in the Midwest here in Omaha and all. What really changes that is a group called Run DMC. Run DMC is a very important rap group. They develop a lot of stuff. And Run DMC is really an important group. But it's still, again, not getting the mainstream radio playtime until they team up with Aerosmith. I mean, Aerosmith, the biggest group in America. And Aerosmith's video, Walk This Way, and Run DMC does the same thing. So you've got two rooms right next to each other, and they're both playing the same song, driving each other nuts. Then they combine. And when you get the Walk This Way video, and the link to that's on the Classroom, that explodes. And that really brings rap out to the forefront, especially here in Nebraska and stuff. Rap, then later on, you're going to get more, when we do the 90s, we take a look at rap, you're going to be talking East Coast, West Coast, and a lot more stuff. But the early rap, it's not like the rap of today. It's not so much. And it's still, you can still hear that disco connection to that era. But it morphs and it changes and it gets more edge, And with Run DMC and other groups, it's going to become very edgier music. So you've got disco and you've got rap. And this is the age of rap. And again, on the Classroom, there'll be a link to both the message and Walk This Way. Punk. But just to step back, disco and rap, I mean, rap is kind of, Motown morphs into disco, but then it morphs back into rap because this is the voice of the streets, And a lot of African American artists who've made their money in both Motown and then in disco, rap is going to open the door and people are going to kick that door open. Punk is a whole different thing. Punk is a reaction. It's basically it's simple music that is all about rebellion. It's the ultimate rebellious music. I love these definitions. Simple, speedy, stripped down rock and roll. No makeup, no egos, no light shows, no nonsense. It's just bam. Okay? Look at the look. The punk look, which in Europe and in England is really big. In New York, there's a punk scene. But the punk scene doesn't get here to Omaha, and it sure the heck doesn't get to Bennington. But this whole punk thing is, look at that. It's to shock you. Look at the haircuts and the clothes. It's to shock you. It's all about shock, making a statement. I think of the groups that are out there, the two that you really need to know are the Ramones and the Sex Pistols. The Ramones are really a good rock group. And you know what? The funny thing is, you go to hockey games, you're going to hear the Ramones Blitzkrieg Bop. You're going to hear I Want to Be Sedated. Okay? The Ramones, New York era punk, if you look at them compared to other punks, it's not as edgy, but I love their music. And there's on the Classroom is a link to the Ramones, and it's just going to be a brief link, but it's going to give you the anger and it show you the speed and the power of the Ramones. The Sex Pistols, well, Sid Vicious. Look at him. They picked him because he looked rebellious. He had a punk attitude. And they went over the line. In England, they came out with an album called God Save the Queen, which is not respectful of the Queen of England. And it does get banned in a lot of places. The Sex Pistols are angry music, okay? But punk speaks. Okay, so in the 70s in America, we've got, the folk music and the hip. Then there's all that dancing stuff. Well, there's people that just don't want to be out there in the leisure suits on the dance floor under the disco ball. There's people that are young and they're angry and they're trying to find a voice, and punk is their voice, okay? It's all about different groups finding different voices, okay? Rap, disco, punk, okay? Pop. Pop music during the 80s is so big. I mean, what do you say? I mean, there's so many groups. I mean, when you start thinking about it, Michael Jackson, the 80s and into the 90s, Michael Jackson and Thriller is huge. Madonna is big. Madonna figures out a way to reinvent herself. Her Material Girl or other things are just really big. The Police. Oh my God. I think of the 80s. Also, I think of stuff like the Genesis, Phil Collins. And I think by 1986, it's like Phil Collins was on the radio. And no matter what station you turn to, you're going to hear Genesis or Phil Collins, And Phil Collins had a great sound to him. Genesis is a great group. Look up Genesis, it's great. I want to mention Weird Al because this is really the birth of Weird Al. Weird Al Yankovic plays an accordion. And what he starts doing is he starts kind of mocking songs. Michael Jackson's Eat It or Beat It becomes Eat It. And he's going to have fun. And, it was kind of funny that a lot of these people, they didn't understand him at first. But Weird Al is big. Eventually, it's kind of like the ultimate thing is if your song is parodied by Weird Al, it means you'd have arrived. And technically, he's still around today. But the 80s and 90s is the age of it. Pop music takes a lot of different venues. Not a lot of really deep music. It's just kind of a reaction. It morphs from disco into pop. Disco really, by early 80s, is dead pretty much, and thank goodness for that. That's just my own humble opinion, of course. But pop music in the 80s and then into the 90s, you're going to get a lot of songs. And then if you watch stuff like The Breakfast Club, the movie, which we'll talk about when we do movies, the music of that, Don't You Go Forgetting About Me, Real Genius, Everyone Wants to Rule the World, and all these other songs. If you watch Caddyshack, you hear a lot of like music, pop music in the 80s and 90s. It's kind of just like pop music of today. It's kind of fun to listen to, but doesn't have a ton of depth. Some of it, like Genesis, has a certain sound to it, but others of it, like the Police. Come on, you got to listen to the Police. All right. We would be remiss if we're talking about 80s music without talking about grunge. It's also called the Seattle sound. And it's an interesting sound. It's kind of, and look at the definition I've got. Name for it: sludgy, fuzzy sound, gnarled, neo-Hendrix, Zeppelinistic, but not so macho. I don't remember where I found it, but I thought, that's kind of about it. And really, it's from that Seattle area. And there's a sound to it. Now, there's a couple groups out there. Now, Soundgarden, that's just a sound. Like you either love Soundgarden or you hate Soundgarden. Look at the people there. It's not punk. It's not pop. It's an edgy, angry music. Okay. Nirvana. I've got a clip on Classroom of Nirvana's Teen Spirit, and that is just, bam, that is the grunge sound. Of course, later on, tragedy when Kurt Cobain dies, it just never quite the same. But there's going to be on your Classroom links where you can listen to a little of that sound. Now, I'm not going to put Soundgarden on, I'll put Nirvana on there, but some people like it. It speaks to them, and there's a speed and anger, something with the music is like, kind of like, so what's life about? What's next? And it really spoke to a lot of the youth. And from there, then you're going to get stuff like other music. I want to mention metal because, Guns N' Roses, my first year teaching was 89, 90, and Guns N' Roses was like the biggest group there was. I was playing in the classroom, and a kid came in and went, "Whoa, you listen to Guns N' Roses." How can you not listen to Guns N' Roses? I mean, damn. Led Zeppelin, still big. Black Sabbath. Now, metal also, it starts getting in a lot faster, harder riffs. It's just a cutting of music when you start getting into groups like Slayer and stuff like that. But it's loud, fast, and it's hardcore music. Guns N' Roses, like I say, come on. It's just Axl Rose in that voice. So what can we take a look at back about the music of this era? I think you'd have to say music always speaks at every era. The music speaks to the people. And all of these groups that we're talking about here are more younger. So what is that saying about the younger kids in America? Again, the 70s, a lot of drug music, rejecting society, protest music, rock that's out there breaking the lines. Well, what about the 80s? The 80s are kind of confused time. Things are happening in America. We're getting this stuff called AIDS, and we don't understand that. There's other things that are happening in the world. We don't understand it. The 80s is kind of like a listless time. The youth of the 80s are trying to find their own voice. Their parents were the people of the 60s. What's the voice of the 80s? And that's why, like with some, the disco becomes mainstream, but then there's reaction. What about those people living in their inner city? What's the music that speaks to them? That's why you get like rap developing. It's a voice. It's an urban sound, Those youngsters that are kind of, stepping out of it, they just rejecting everything. You've got that angry music. You got punk. You've got heavy metal and stuff. And then you always have pop. You listen to the radio. That's the filler music that's always out there. And there's a lot of groups. Even today, you think of the pop groups. But the songs and the groups that last are ones that can connect with a certain sound. In the 80s, I think some of the best songs were the ones that were connected with movies. So when people hear those like the pop songs, that's what flashes back to movies and stuff. Oh, okay, I remember that movie. But 80s American youth is starting to change. What do you listen to today? And how does the music that you listen to today reflect your culture or what you're into? Just like ever, today you've got gravel country roads. I mean, we're here in Bennington, so you got a lot of country fans, Jake, and I'm talking to you there. And so you got a lot of artists. But country today is kind of different than the country of the 70s and 80s, okay? With the Willie Nelson and all that. You've got pop today. There's a lot of different pop groups out there. And there's a lot of groups out there like the Bruno Mars and all that are going to merge both pop and rap and other stuff together. What the music of today is and how we look at it, I think we're going to have about 5 years or 10 years to look back and say, that's the music. And what I want to know is how is music going to react to the COVID virus, the changes that that's going to give to society. But that, kids, is for another day.